Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Matthew Ho, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
In the last week, we've had a number of guys on the show. Now, anytime I'm on the show talking about Afghanistan, I'm in effect like a guest as well. But, you know, we'll talk about it from a host point of view. We had Chris Schaefer on, who's a longtime Green Beret warrant officer. We talked about our challenges in places like Iraq and Afghanistan as we went and tried to create stability and everything. You worked on the State Department side. I think you know Peter Van Buren. He is a fellow, and I'm going to put you in the whistleblower category because you bring light to the nonsense that happened. We had the best intention. We had a lot of training, and basically nobody was prepared to deal with the actual reality on the ground. You worked in Zabul province and said, I can't take it anymore. I got to go. And in part that in some ways, and I'll just say this because I'll say the same thing about myself. It breaks your brain a little bit. You talk about a moral injury. You talk about the PTSD that comes from it. I also worked in Zabul, and it was the icing on the cake where I was as good as I could be at working overseas. I was able to take brigades and adjust their view and get them to go 180 degrees opposite direction, completely away from combat and towards like stabilizing the government and everything else. And a year after I left, and this is an important story. It's the main part of the story, and I think you'll resonate with this, and that's why I appreciate you let me yak on for a minute here. The crowning thing we had built trust. The governors were introducing me to other people. I was getting to know the provincial council, and they're introducing me. It's not me introducing myself. And I'm setting meetings, and we're really having a lot of success. And one of the things the military asked us was, hey, figure out how we work these radio literacy programs. And we did. We figured it out. We sat down with tribal elders, the Minister of Education, and a religious leader. And they said, okay, we've talked to everybody, and here's what we think we want to do. And they're like, we want your help, but what we do not want you to do, and let's be clear on this, and everybody's nodding their head, yes, we do not want this. Never, ever, ever deliver books directly to the Ministry of Education. It's my job. I'll come to you. It puts me on the spot when you guys come to me. Number two, never, ever, ever deliver books directly to our kids. Well, year after I leave, there goes the State Department on a stupid photo op to go deliver books to people. And the people that I wrote that report, everybody had access to the report. Everybody got an instant distro of it. And there was a guy named Tim Basher there. He for sure had a copy of it. And I'm not trying to throw Tim under the bus because he doesn't have the power to stop the State Department from being stupid. But everybody had that. And in spite of that, they went anyhow. And they got themselves blown up and died. A couple other Americans died as well. She's sort of the namesake. And then Secretary Kerry gets up there and says, you know, we can't, let people who are trying to force others to do things their way stop us. I'm like, you were literally talking about yourself. You know, we are the ones shooting people in the face. We are the ones causing the chaos. One of the things I learned a while back, and I don't know if you agree with this, and I'm finally going to shut up, is in terms of the insurgency, and I didn't know this right away. It took me a while to get there. We were the insurgents. We knocked over the government and tried to put a new one in place. That is absolutely an insurgency. And now look who's in charge, the guys who we knocked over. And we fought a counterinsurgency fight, which means we really built a fight to fight ourselves, which makes no goddamn sense. All right. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show.
Pete, thanks for having me on. Sorry I was a minute or two late. I forgot that this is a live show. So I was doing my Cavalier thing. Well, I'm going to make a cup of coffee. It's okay. Yeah. It's all taped, no time. And the other thing I need to apologize in advance. I've got something in my backyard today that my foxhound is going nuts about. So at some point, he's been in and out that back door like 8 times and barking. So I apologize for the interruptions you all hear from at my dog Alex. I don't think I've ever expressed it that way about us being the insurgents. But I agree with you. And it's a rather I think most of us look at insurgency as a bottom up, right? Phenomenon. Where in this sense, the way you describe it, Pete, and again, I think you're accurate. We are a top down insurgency, right? We came in, we usurped the people who had not just the current power, but also in many ways traditional power, particularly in a place like Zabul. And we brought in people from the outside, not just people like you and I, but people from other parts of the country. The way I would describe it is if after Hurricane Katrina, we went to a parish in Louisiana and brought in and put into power the Chicago National Guard, or the Illinois National Guard or the New York National Guard or something like that, brought in outsiders. And that's not even an accurate way to describe it, because we haven't had, when I was there, it was 2009. So it was 30 years of civil war. We haven't had that here, so you had in Afghanistan this civil war that now, 40 plus years of divide and conquer strategy by both the Americans and by the Soviets, by the Pakistanis, by the Indians, by the Iranians to a degree, as well as a revenge cycle. That is, if anyone knows anything about war, who's taken part in war, revenge is one big revenge cycle in many ways, particularly when you're talking about a civil war or an insurgency. So I agree, Pete. Really, we came in there, and your point about that. I've been to that school where that attack happened. And just we could. There's a lot of things we could talk about: the continual mistakes, the complete unwillingness to not even learn from the Afghans, but to learn from other Americans. The arrogance, the hubris, and the lack of intellectual, not just lack of intellectual curiosity, but intellectual honesty. And I know before when we spoke a few days ago, and I'm looking forward to listening to your interview with Stu Scheller. And we had talked about his interview with Jocko Willikin, and some of the things that Stu said, and I don't agree with Stu on a lot. Politically, we're probably polar opposites, but his experiences and what he said about the wars and the experiences through these wars that drove him to the point that this past summer he had to put his career, his family's well-being, his life basically on the line to do what was right. I found in that interview, and I'm sure it's going to happen when I listen to the one you did with him, but that 4-hour interview he did with Jocko, all I did was nod in agreement the entire time. And that was my conversation with you the other day. You contact me and we just hit it off and have this conversation where it's just, my God, do people realize what has occurred these last 20 years in these wars? And just the institutional insanity, the institute, right? As well as the reasons for that institutional insanity, which is really about institutional greed, I think, So no, I look forward to this conversation we're about to have, man.
Yeah. And a lot of these things I say quite a bit, but they just remain true. And so I say them. One of the things that strikes me is once I read your resignation letter, and anybody can look it up online. I'm not even going to put the link up there because that's over 10-year-old news. But when you wrote your letter, I thought, I remember that. I remember that now. But when I went to Zabul, I had no idea, because I am part of the problem, right? And so we have this, people always talk about 21-year wars. That's bullshit. It's 21-year wars, but also there's complete institutional amnesia.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea you existed. And I should have. I should be, hey, listen, here are all the things that we have done here, what our patch means. Like if an American troop goes out and does an atrocity of some kind, right? And they have that patch on their shoulder, that doesn't go away for the locals. They talk amongst themselves. We seem to forget that. So you get all of these things where you look around and you're like, we are truly insane. We come in, and what made me special was that I stayed in an area and then I watched, and I knew the level of unpreparedness or misprepared, if I want to be nice, right? Like, you guys are prepared for something that's not here. Like tankers who go do tank training before deploying and then never get in a tank the entire time in Afghanistan or Iraq, right? Yeah. You are not prepared for the fight on hand. I learned it. I learned where they were short, and then they would be like, I have an idea what we need to do. I'm like, oh, that's page 15, dude. And then I would go back in time And I only discovered this slowly and started to slowly build this capacity. But I would go back in time and grab this unit, the unit before that, you all the way down and be like, here are all the slides of people that have tried this very idea. I'll do whatever you guys want to do. It's your show. Can we not be the next unit in line that gets this wrong? Because when I'm here in 2 years, I'm going to point this out that you guys got this wrong. And you should get instant, like, oh my God, is that right? Is that really what happened? Let's absolutely slow down and get this right. Half of the people will be like, screw that dude. He makes a lot of money or whatever it was, right? There would be contempt towards me. And I'm like, dude, I'm trying to help. And then the other half would get it, but there weren't enough people aligned. And that problem, I hope I'm illustrating this well, is complete across everything that we did. We had no idea what we'd done before. We never tested our systems. And I'm going to shut up here in a second. But one of the things I did, I learned to do was, I was with a bunch of police. And we got in a fight outside of Zabul, like way out, like two districts off the beaten path, which is, as you know, way the hell out there. We got into a firefight, and I'm like, hey, so what do you guys do now? What do you cops do? You're Afghan cops. How do you get more RPG rounds? Get more like, oh yeah, we put a request in, and I'm like, fascinating. Let me see what happens, because this is 2011, right? There should be a functioning government at this point. So I'm like, put that request in and let me know who you send it to. And so I track it, ding, 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 and it gets killed. That request gets killed by an American who doesn't know anything about anything. He just assumes that the guy I'm partnered with, and he wasn't my partner, but the guy that I'm talking about is a bad guy because he read it on a baseball card somewhere, and baseball cards are always to the negative. So of course he reads like a bad guy because we only look at threat. And so an American killed the government's ability to provision its own people that are on the side of a damn mountain in the middle of nowhere that are desperate for support. And you're going to tell me at any point in time in the next 10 years after that the government was ready to stand on its own? Come on.
I'm laughing because, I had, I was in Iraq twice before I was in Afghanistan, and once as a Marine Corps company commander. And my first sergeant was, I never saw him fazed or upset, except for the time that he was told by a major at Camp Pendleton that we couldn't draw winter clothing. We couldn't draw, winter, fleeces and things like that, because Iraq was a warm weather country and we wouldn't need it there. And this was in 2006. You know what I mean? Right? I mean, like, I've never seen him I never saw him lose his temper ever, except for that occasion, because this, and that is, you might say, okay, that was just one idiot who didn't know what they were talking about. But that type of story, I think, for the people who are listening, who have participated in this, know that type of story is legion. I think this is where you really get into the question of the institution itself, and what are the institutions? How is it structured? What are its operating principles? What is its philosophy? What does it teach? What does it demand of the people within it? Because as individuals, Pete, I give us a lot of leeway. Look, I went to war 3 times before I said enough, right? And, and every time there's an excuse, every time there's a reason. And those of us who do this, hey, people join the military for all kinds of reasons. A lot of it's economic, right? Poverty draft kind of thing. There's a lot of that. But there's very few people going to the military who are going in thinking that they don't want to be, thinking that they want to be a bad guy, right? Yeah. Most of us go in with this idea that we're going to be the guys with the white hats on. And so we end up making excuses. We may end up making rationalizations. We end up, in my case, after coming back from Iraq, my first time spending a year in Iraq, 04, 05, a year there, coming back thinking the whole thing is completely effed. I end up going to the State Department desk on Iraq after that. And it's about, well, okay, I couldn't make a difference there at that moment, but if I stay in, then I can make a difference when I'm a senior person, and then I was a reserve Marine officer at the time. So when I'm on the State Department Iraq desk, when I get a notice saying, hey, we need volunteers and it's my MOS and my rank, okay, hey, well, I'm a better officer than other guys. I can bring guys. I mean, so you're continually evolving as an individual to try and meet your own values, to meet your own principles. And this is, of course, something that backfires on us because of the whole concept. I don't want to say concept, but because of the whole reality of moral injury, which is a driving factor in veteran suicides, right? But we do. So for me, it takes me 3 times to get to the point where I say enough and I quit. And the reality is at that point, I am morally and intellectually broken. I don't know how good I was to anyone over there at that point anyway. I mean, probably a good thing to get me out because I was, so that's just saying that this is why institutions need to have pillars upon which they are built that function and that are built upon principle, built upon operational evidence, right? I mean, the fact that we were talking about this, you have brought up in Zabul. People who aren't familiar with Zabul, it's southeastern Afghanistan. It's the province to the immediate northeast of Kandahar on the Pakistani border. Mullah Omar, who was the leader of the Taliban, the founder and the leader of the Taliban for many years, from Zabul. According to a couple sources, it's where he died. I'm not sure how legitimate those sources are or not, but that's one of the stories about him. We had this conversation about being in the district called Chajoy, and to your point about not knowing what anyone had done. I'm up in Chajoy. It's the biggest population center in Zabul, and Zabul is very rural. And, this young Army captain points out to me, he says, we've got 3 district buildings, basically kind of like town halls that were built by successive U.S. Army units here in Zabul. So each year, a U.S. Army went into Zabul and they built the town hall. They left. The next unit came in, built the town hall. They left, and another unit came in and built a town hall. And maybe it wasn't 3 in a row, but it was like 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5. And this captain was like, see, there's the blue one. Yeah. There's the green one. There's the yellow one. Like that kind of thing. And people, again, if you've been through this, that this is not an outlier, that this is not an exaggeration, that this was the reality. And so I think having these kinds of conversations, I think does 2 things. One, it shows the need and necessity for institutional change. I don't know anyone who can look at the U.S. military, the U.S. government, the State Department, the CIA, and just narrow it to the last 20 years. I mean, I say you could take this back to World War II, but just for the sake of what we're doing here today, the last 20 years, and say that we don't need fundamental restructuring of those things. Just the fact that we are spending more money now than ever on the military, and our Air Force has less planes than it ever has, it's got to tell you something, right? I mean, like, all right, same thing with the Navy shipbuilding program. How much money is going into that? And look at what is it delivering? How can you say we don't need fundamental restructuring when just on those, let alone the lost wars, right? Yeah.
There's a lot in what you just said. and boy, oh boy. So one of the things, so let's just go back, and I don't want to make this all about Stu, but one of the things you see when an institution cares, because let's be honest, if the DOD, if DOS, if the United States government, if they cared about getting this stuff right, they would have acted differently.
Right.
When the Marines were motivated and they cared, they moved that man through the UCMJ process in literally record time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Processed him for separation from the service in record time. They cared about that, and they put effort into it, and it happened. What they never cared about, and I don't mean just the Marines, I mean all of us, we're all culpable. What we never cared about was getting it right. We never cared to stop and go, hey, is this government thing working? And I used the example when we were on the phone. I defy any commander who was in Iraq or Afghanistan to tell me specifically how many schools were in the area, what the daily attendance was, what the curriculum looked like, who the teacher. Impossible. That stuff we should know, and we shouldn't have to know it ourselves. We should be able to go to our partner and have them say, yeah, we tracked that already. We've learned it. But we never, ever had that capacity because we didn't care. And what we cared about was training, like the Marines especially, and I'm going to be really critical on your brothers and sisters right now, and I love the Marines, but I'm going to be critical. When you go to Helmand always looking for a fight, you will always find one. You will never find stability. You cannot create stability if you can never graduate. Not their fault is the whole thing with COIN where they say clear, hold, build. And then what? That is the shittiest algorithm for success ever because there's no end. You never say transition. You never say, hey, a held place is stable and we can start to project other power out. And then we can really build something with the Afghans in mind. Like, what are we building here today, guys? How many times did you sit in a meeting where we decided for the Afghans who weren't present in the meeting where the thing that they never asked for was going to be built?
Yeah, oh man, I got a bunch of things to say about all this.
I love it.
Particularly like the whole coin thing. And I heard Stu say this on his show with Jocko, and maybe he said the same with you. The only way you win a coin fight is not by getting into one, and the thing about clear whole build, fantastic. But two things about that. One, why can't the other side just wait you out?
Yeah.
It's where they live. Why can't they just wait you out? The other is like, how does clear whole build address the legitimate grievances of the population that lives there that are now in their 30th or 40th year of civil war that, again, has been defined by divide and conquer strategy that has broken down along ethnic and tribal and other lines, regional lines and things like that. How does that take care of that? How does that handle any of that? With Helmand, I was in meetings in Kandahar because of my position as a civilian officer on the PRT, on the Provincial Reconstruction Team. Because of my position, I was the senior U.S. representative there. And so I would go to these meetings in Kandahar. And I remember the Marine General in Helmand saying exactly that about Helmand. Like, this was in 2009. So midst of the escalation of the war in Afghanistan, not the second, prior to President Obama's announcement of sending more troops in the fall. People have to remember about the escalation of this war. It wasn't just the escalation of forces, the surge that occurred in the fall of 2009. President Obama comes into office in January 2009, and there are 30,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan in January 2009. Within 14 months, there are 100,000 U.S. troops. But when President Obama goes to West Point in December 2009 and says, yes, we're going to surge to victory and we'll be done in a year and a half and we'll have won, and I'm a better commander in chief, a better wartime president than a Republican is, which to me, this is what that's all about, these wars, right? By that time, the United States has already put 35 or 40,000 troops into Afghanistan throughout 2009, or is the process of doing so. Obama comes in and there's 60,000 U.S. and NATO troops and contractors in Afghanistan. Within 14, 15, 16 months, there's 250,000 U.S. and NATO troops and contractors, 100,000 U.S. troops, 100,000 contractors, and about 40,000 NATO troops, right? 250,000 man army. This is what we put in there. People have to remember that's what our strategy was. But with sitting, across from General Nicholson, who was the Marine Corps commander in Helmand in 2009 at this table, and as we were discussing this strategy to put more troops into Helmand, and Nicholson's comments were very clear. It's like, yeah, you can give me more troops. We're just going to get into fights with them. That was it. And I know a good friend of mine who was on with the Marine Expeditionary Brigade that went into Helmand in 2008. The whole story on that is very interesting and very instructive. Originally, that brigade, which was really just two reinforced infantry battalions, that Marine Expeditionary Brigade, as we called it, was supposed to go to southern Kandahar and interdict Taliban coming across the border from Pakistan. Yes. That was the idea, right?
Yes.
There was an officer, part of that whole planning process, who had been in Kandahar. And he said, you know what? If we put these guys down in southern Kandahar, all they're going to be doing is stopping farmers with goats and sheep in the back of their pickup trucks. That's all they're going to do. We go to Helmand, we're going to get into a fight. And sure enough, Marine Corps went to Helmand, ran into a buzzsaw. I was actually working, my buddy who was there, he was the intelligence officer for one of the two battalions that was there. And I was actually able, because of the work I was doing at the time with the Department of Defense, able to communicate with him over, our classified computer network as often as he could because he was middle of nowhere, Helmand Province. But the reports I was getting back, their reliance on, B-1 bomber strikes to keep their guys alive because that's the level of buzzsaw that they have run into. Right. And one, the knowledge that was going to occur, they thought they were going to go in there, get into fights. And two, the level of the insurgency that they were running into. But the interesting thing to understand, this gets back to the whole institutional thing.
Yeah.
Why was the Marine Corps so interested in getting to a fight? Well, this gets into intra institutional aspects. And, people may not believe me, but a lot of this had to do with battle streamers. A lot of this had to do with, in terms of Iraq, the West Coast Marine Corps, so 1st Marine Expeditionary Force and 1st Marine Division, they were the ones who did the invasion of Iraq. They're the ones who did the 1st and 2nd battles of Fallujah. They're the ones who did the Anbar, Waking, and the Surge. When I was there, I was part of 1MEF, as we called it, West Coast Unit. 2nd Marine Division, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, they hadn't done those. They didn't have those battle streamers. And am I saying that was the reason why they went to Helmand? No, I'm not saying it was the reason, but it was a very real reason because anyone who's been a part of an organization knows that the psychology of the organization, the ego of the organization is a huge factor. Organizations are living organisms. I mean, we have people who have PhDs in this, the term Leviathan, it has a meaning and a context, I think, that we rightfully apply to our federal government. Yeah. But that can also apply to other things like East Coast Marine Corps, West Coast Marine Corps.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and the same thing, not just battle streamers, but promotions. You're a Marine picked to command Marines in combat. Well, you need opportunities. That means the guy above you's like, I'm going to get my Marines into the mix. Yeah. And then the SOCOM guy's like, hey, listen, I know that we are SEALs and we normally kick doors and do direct action. Can we do FID? FID, by the way, for the audience, is like not what SEALs do doctrinally. Yeah. So they'll tell you in one breath, this is not what we doctrinally do. Let me tell you how we're going to do it. You're like, dude. Then the SF guy's like, we can kick in doors. They all want to do, they all are compelled to do it because that's how you get the path out. One of the things that I disagree with on Stu, and this is not a hard disagreement, and I think because he's only just now got out, his brain hasn't had a chance to catch up. He'll get there. But one of my favorite questions to ask is, and it's whether it's the Navy, whoever it is, when was the last time the Navy crossed a T in combat? When was the last? So, and you're an infantry commander, right?
No, I was a combat engineer. I was always with the infantry, though. All right, my whole career. Yeah, my whole 10 years. Yeah.
Close with and destroy the enemy.
Yep, exactly.
When was the last time a Marine unit did that? And it's been a long time.
Well, here's another thing.
2 or 3 Taliban. I mean, like destroy the enemy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because we've fought smart foes that won't mass for us to do it. I mean, they're smart. I mean, why do that? Why get yourself, that was this thing we said about Iraq was that, the guys that did that, we killed very easily in 2003 and 2004. Right. And then by 2005, we were fighting people who actually knew what they were doing or had some smarts about them or had some historical experience that this is not the way to do it.
And I want to jump in, but I don't want to cut you off. And so what we have, back to the battle streamer things, we have these captains and these colonels that have read Hannibal, about him, and they want to line up an army against Lake Tazarine and like shove them in and annihilate them. I'll just be unfair and say they fetishize this. They want to do this. And yet the Taliban's like, yeah, we'll meet you over there tomorrow. And then they just don't go. They don't go to the fight because they don't want to die like that. They fight in a way that we can't fight. And this is the thing. The institution refuses to see that. The culture of the institution, those commanders refuses, incapable of seeing that reliably and repeatedly. That was my interruption. Sorry about that.
But just the key on that. One to back up what you're saying, when we get more units in Zabul, when I'm there in 2009 over the summer, a mechanized infantry unit comes in, a striker unit, right, comes in. And so I'm working with these guys, and they show me their plan for the battle space, and they are using literally the same graphical overlays, right? The same. And for people who don't know, graphical overlays or you have a map, and then so you have symbols for units, and you have symbols to show what the units are going to do, like this unit's going to block, and this that kind of thing. And they are using literally the same graphical symbols.
What he's saying right there
For this insurgency that we used when I first learned this stuff in the 90s, which was coming from the Cold War stuff because they hadn't updated it, about stopping a Soviet tank advance into Norway. Literally the same graphical symbols. And if you're using the symbols, if you're translating and communicating through symbols, that is what you intend to do in terms of that you're showing your plan that way. That is your plan.
Yeah.
Right. The perception is reality. So this is how you perceive it. This is how it's going to be. So, you're talking about an enemy that these guys ride around on little 60cc motorbikes, and you're going to do we're going to have a company, a mechanized infantry company do a blocking position here. I mean, this just makes no sense, but the other thing, too, is that so we have our own inability to see inward. The other thing then is that, as you would know, Pete, you go out to these units that are middle of nowhere. They're in a district completely surrounded by Taliban. The Taliban, the guy that I would ask these army lieutenants and captains, not just in southern Afghanistan, I was also up in the east. And so I had a good understanding of what the fight up in the east was like and the fight in the south. And so I was in Kunar, Logman, Nangarhar, so I knew what it was like up there. And the same thing, too, I'd ask these lieutenants and captains who had these battle positions, throughout, these areas, these districts controlled by the Taliban. What do you control? And, I would say, I've heard that you guys only control what your mortars can reach to. Yeah. And almost always these young captains and lieutenants would correct me, and they would say, no, I don't control that. I control what my machine guns can hit.
That's right.
That's it. I can't control what my machine gunners can't see. That's it. And that's the whole district. And then I would go and I will look at our latest report that will go to the Pentagon, to Congress, that, when it came out of ISAF headquarters and everything, and it would show that we controlled this district.
Yeah.
Right. Even though I'm sitting here with the guys on the ground, and they're telling me the only thing in this district they can control is what they can hit with their machine guns. That's it. And meanwhile, you see that. The other thing, too, is so you're thinking, well, how come this this battle position, which has 25, 30 soldiers and an equal number of Afghan soldiers on it, how come they're not overrun? How come they don't mass and overrun them? And two things. One, our air power. They don't want to mass because they don't want to, But the other thing, too, is because each of these battle positions are giving out $1 million or $2 million in cash every year. Right. I mean, it's just like they're ATMs. Right. I mean, so there is no incentive for the Taliban to overrun these battle positions because they're making money off of these battle positions, as well as, too, if they did, it would invite their destruction. So they got a good thing going. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard these stories. I would talk to guys at these places, and you'd hear stories about how the Taliban would literally call this little base and say, don't come out today. We got something going on. We don't want to get into a fight with you. Just let's all do ourselves a favor and don't come out today. I mean, I heard those stories are real, I mean, and so why wasn't, if we know all that, right? If these lieutenants and captains are happily telling this to some State Department dude who's standing there, why is this not being incorporated? Why then we have this problem, like you said, where unit after unit, they keep doing the same thing.
I want to say a couple things. One is, and it's somewhere it originates, and it's institutional. You're 100% right. Where every large scale commander, like battalion to maybe division, they all come in and they say the same thing. We will push to the south, the accent to the south, and we will force the Taliban. And then Pete's in the back room, and I'm like, hey, most of your vehicles are incapable of doing that. There's no road in the wintertime. here's what's going to happen. And Pete's predicting the future because Pete has seen the past, right? Like, you're going to do this, and I want you to try. I'm just saying that there's no road, so someone's going to break down because these vehicles are worn out, exhausted vehicles.
Yeah.
People are going to get hungry and have to pee, and you're going to realize you don't have the capability to stay where you're at, and you're going to have to self-recover, and you're going to come back and you'll be like, how do we do this again? So your battle plan is already wrong. People predict the future. You guys go ahead and do what you want to do and you come back. So that's one thing to say about all of that. And they all say that we're going to go and we're going to drive the no, you're not. Yeah. Here's the other thing. You go to the districts, and in defense of those lieutenants and captains, they are all economy of force, which for the audience means that you cannot just go out and take on any fight you want. That's Unlike in video games, there is a finite number of rounds that you have in a patrol because you just can't carry. Look, you can't you can't put 1,000 rounds on every person. And if you do, you're not carrying much else. It's too much. And so you will.
Yeah, exactly, Pete. Not in eastern Afghanistan, not in Zabul, in those hills with those rocks.
Yeah.
And just so people understand what you said about the roads. Sorry to cut you off, but because I don't think people get this. When Pete says no roads, it's not like, hey, I went to this hunting camp one time, man, and that road was a mess, but we got no roads. No, what we're talking about is that there is during the rainy season, flash floods come down, and they've kind of created this like pathway that's strewn with boulders and giant holes. That's your road.
Be an
That's
exact.
it. Yeah.
And every size of gravel, from sand to gigantic boulders.
Yeah, exactly.
All in some state of misuse. And so you weigh 300 pounds, and you are putting your ankles on three-dimensional surfaces of all different sizes, and it destroys soldiers and it destroys vehicles.
Yeah.
So when that lieutenant's like, yeah, I know they're out there, and guess what? I can't buy that fight. Like, it's too much because there's a valley, and you may remember this. Arghandab is the district, and it's like two districts above so there's Kalat one, and then it's above that. So you're a 60-minute flight just to get there. You can't drive there. Forget that. And that guy's like,
when I was there, the Green Berets tried to go in there, and I remember talking to that captain. No one got hurt, thankfully. But it was like a fireworks show. As soon as we got up there, he's like, I didn't know they had that many RPGs to fire at us. It was amazing. They couldn't get in. Yeah.
When you say rural, we need a different word to describe. Like, this is desolation, wilderness, granite rock. Like, nothing out here is easy. I mean, nothing. Yeah. There are no animals. There are no trees. It's just hard.
Yep.
So when this lieutenant's out in I wrote about this in one of my academic papers. This lieutenant has someone probably from the State Department or some kind of enabler from the State Department show up like, hey, we need to go survey election results, particularly females. And the dude's like, not going to happen.
You're going to make me spit my coffee out. I'm telling you that.
Yes. I want to add one more element to this because this all goes back to what you were saying. The bubble of influence is absolutely small arms, right? Whatever, machine guns, whatever it is. And then so before I go out, I go talk to the commander I'm working for, his battalion commander. And I'm like, hey, what can I find out for you? Like, not the bullshit that everybody wants to know. Like, what? He's like, here are 2 questions I have for you. Why do the Taliban keep attacking us outside of small arms range? Right. So they're in town shooting back towards us on the side of a mountain. And 2, why won't the Afghans take our help? And I had no earthly clue. I don't know. Right. I got to go find out. Well, here's what I figured out. The Taliban would come out, and I would call it dinner theater. They would go out to the ridge where they would shoot from, and they would shoot at the Americans and the Afghan forces with no hope of ever hitting. They had a recoilless rifle, which for everybody is a rocket. And it's the dumbest name for a weapon ever. And they would shoot this thing. And unless you were standing under it, it was never going to hurt. It could kill you, but it's not really that dangerous, which is insane. But in a combat sense, it's not that insane. And so, our lieutenant, captain actually, figured out a really cool thing. He's like, I'm going to communicate back. Because what these guys were doing was getting into a firefight every night and going into town and say, look, the Americans can't do anything for you. Make sure you keep in mind where your alliances are. And so that captain's like, stand on that ridge again any night you want. I've got my Barrett on a hilltop. And I'll communicate to the whole basin because that thing's loud. Yeah. And he's like, wow. And he didn't even care if anybody was there. Around that time when they would show up, he would just shoot a couple of rounds down there. And it would let everybody know, like, we weren't able to advance that win, though. It was just like a conversation that we could never complete. So when you say that we didn't have influence, It's not cowardice. It's
No.
you can be 45 minutes off your camp and get into a firefight that you will not survive because there are not enough of you. And the guys who are in the back, who are the QRF, which would be half of your remaining force, cannot get to you in time. There's no way.
Exactly. No, exactly that. We had experiences, and I should have, before I got on the call, Pete, I should have looked at a map of Zabul to remember the different district names and where they were. But we had a convoy, a supply convoy with a route clearance team try to go one district over one time. And because of the IEDs, along with the terrain, it took them more than 24 hours. It was probably 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, if that. Took more than 24 hours, and I know that's my friends who went into Helmand. That was their experience. I mean, there's an amazing photo from 2009 of the Marines going into Helmand, of them humping in, marching in with their equipment because they couldn't get in with their trucks. You know, I mean, and that you're talking about humping in with 125, 130 pound of stuff on you. It just, I think it keeps coming back to this thing about the institution. Why didn't the institution learn? Why didn't the institution do better? I mean, we were there for so long, and I would have these experiences. I had this one lady show up. She's pretty smart person, I mean, and she had been in Afghanistan in 02, 03. Things were different. You could drive down the ring road, the major highway, and so when she came back 6 years later, and she's just, how did this happen in the sense of how did we just seem like we don't know what we're doing and doing it for the first time? It is. I mean, I think those are very serious questions to have, because it's just not, as we were saying earlier, not confined to the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq. I mean, certainly look at the catastrophe of the war in Syria, right? The catastrophe of the war in Libya. You just had, we've these secret wars all throughout Africa. What are they accomplishing other than getting thousands and thousands of people to join these militias and insurgent groups or jihadist groups? What are they accomplishing? I think now, as we talk about institutions, we talk about metrics. And this is something, again, that Stu Scheller talks about a lot. Metrics of effectiveness, right? Metrics of success. How do we know what's working? I mean, even Don Rumsfeld said this, years ago. I mean, Rumsfeld said this at the very beginning of the war on terror, these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's like, how are we ever going to know if we are winning? To paraphrase him.
So here's one of the things that leaps I've made in logic in terms of how we measure and how we fight. We have a belief that our actions, every unit, and I know you'll appreciate this, and I'm going to try to do it the other way. So every unit has an arrow that has actions leading on it until their redeployment, and that inexorably leads to victory. So every PRT commander, every battalion commander, they all think that they have a legacy. But if you and I were to go right now with any of those people and said, show me your legacy, they wouldn't be able to find it. It wouldn't be there, because we measured effect. What we had to measure was affect. This is an affect fight. All modern fights are affect fights. If you can't reliably, and you think about what the enemy does, if you can't actually I should say co-belligerents. I don't even think of them as an enemy, because they don't fight like an enemy. They fight like someone who's competing for the attention of the civil populace. If you can't reliably create the emotional response to your actions, you will lose. And so the Taliban can cow the populace and get them to do satisficing behavior to us, like, yes, of course, Nam Nam Saddam, we're all going to do what you want to do, and then turn around and do the exact opposite. It's because we're losing that affect fight. And you cannot win if you're focused on effect, because affect will whoop effect's ass every day of the week. You have to stack affect. And especially if you're trying to stabilize a country and teach and train and develop the government. Like, if you can't, here's the other thing. It's not about us winning hearts and minds. It's about the government getting the hearts and minds. The more we draw that attention towards us and try to, the more you deny it of the government. And so we had this problem institutionally where we never realized that. We had this, I'm not against coin. I just think that coin is hackneyed and needs to be advanced, right? Clear, hold, build. And then what? How do you transition? How can you tell me you've built when there's no goddamn reliable electricity. A guy I love this story. A guy in Iraq's like, I can light the dirt in my yard on fire. It's got so much oil in it. How was there not a high tension power line system? You guys spend $1 trillion here. How is this thing still like this? And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to write that down, put that, and give that to the boss. And that's the kind of spying I did. I'd like, here's where you're getting your ass kicked, sir. And they loved it because I gave them stuff that didn't say, hey, we're winning. Well, we all know the opposite is true.
Oh, I mean, Guy, you brought up the radios before, and I can't remember if we talked about this on the phone.
That was on the phone, yeah.
We had this radio program come through, and actually kind of cool because I ended up hanging out with the host of the television show Afghan Idol, just like American Idol, but and when we were on Kandahar together, all the Afghan we were over in what was called the Boardwalk, which was where they had all the shops and some food stalls and a Tim Hortons coffee shop. And when I was on the Boardwalk with this guy, the Afghan Idol host, a bunch of Afghans recognized him, right? Oh, it was a big deal. It was like I can't remember the name of he's the Ryan Seacrest of Afghanistan, I guess, right? I mean, but anyway, that was the cool part of the story. The rest of this is not cool at all. So what happened was, and it's a good idea, right? It's a good idea. We're going to put up these radio towers all throughout Afghanistan, particularly, and it's where we can get our message out. Right. I mean, first of all, how does the Taliban get the message out? Two dudes on again, 60cc motorbikes drive from village to village and tell people stuff.
Yep.
Okay. That's how they do it. Pretty effective. Right. Yeah. How we're going to do it. We're going to build radio towers. So this gets done. I don't know what it costs. 20 million, 30 million, $40 million. I don't know.
And then who got the contract? Because
I mean, the guy I was working with, the American guy who had who was their representative, was a great guy. And he was one of the ones who told me a lot of this stuff that made me realize how much of a disaster it was. He was an honest guy. I don't know if he ever participated in anything like this again. This is a guy who, like a lot of people who go over there to do this type of work, come out of the NGO community, come out of the development community, who are really trying to make a change, really trying to make a difference. And then and so anyway, we put up these radio towers all throughout rural Afghanistan. And first of all, there's no content to play on these radio towers.
Yeah.
There's no ability to record content to then put on the radio towers. There's no fuel for the generators for the radio towers. And probably maybe the thing that we probably should have been aware of the most, but we're not, kind of like you're talking about the schools, Afghans in these villages, these rural villages, don't have radios.
Right.
So, and so I write up a report, goes to the embassy and everything else, and basically, okay, maybe we can fix some of this stuff then.
Yeah. What
goes back from the embassy to Washington, D.C.? The radio towers have been built. This is a mad success. Right? I mean, green, the whole, green traffic lights all over the place, smiley faces. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. We did great, and of course, and photos, little photos of these towers. And the fact is, again, no content to put on the radios, no ability to record content, no fuel for the generators, and the Afghans themselves don't have radios to listen to it. You know what I mean? So, it's kind of like another time. Someone came in, they printed off all these newspapers, in a province that had a literacy rate of what was it, 15%, less than 50% for men, and less than 2% for women or something like that. So you basically were just handing out as we dumped these. As we dumped these newspapers all over the place, we were just basically, as kebab wrappers that all they were. Yeah.
The radio thing is an absolute shit show. One of the things, and again, like when I say I'm a spy, I don't focus on threat because there's no need. We're already getting our ass kicked. Yeah. So I hate the radio because the radio is not just a net destabilizer. It's like a cubicle net destabilizer. It just takes everything down with it. If the governor is willing to get on his radio station and talk, you let him. You don't go, we don't trust the Afghan. That motherfucker is he's the goddamn boss. He gets to talk on the goddamn radio. Let him. The other thing is I would go out because I'd see the briefing. Sir, the radio network is up and running. As you can see, let me orient to my slide. This is north. These circles represent the coverage area. And I'm like, perfect. I'm going to go test that with the radio. And I come back and be like, that's all bullshit. You know? And I say it in a nice way. but this is not working the way you think it. Oh, well, we have an amplifier. I'm like, okay, great. By the way, there's mountains everywhere, so line of sight's kind of fucked here. Just in case you guys didn't notice on the map, allow me to orient you to the vertical part of the problem. And so then you say, hey, there's no radios in the valley. And then, God, I had to be so careful when I wrote reports because, like, we can fix that problem. We will now send 10,000 radios to this district. You know, like, please don't. Please
yes,
don't.
exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But that all these problems are so multidimensional that you just, the institution is so desperate to get it right, so desperate to act, they have no elegance. Because, and this is a big thing, I believe, not only do we have institutional amnesia, and I had no idea, even though you were there maybe 2 years before me, I had no idea you existed. I had no idea what you did. And that's the same for everybody. And everybody who returns to Iraq or Afghanistan never does the same job again. And so we never develop a mastery of our job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get promoted, you move to a different section, you're doing staff time. You never, ever do the same job that you never mastered in the first place. And so everybody thinks they're great at this shit. If you and I went to a room right now with the bunch of people that did KLEs, you know, I would say, hey, how many of you had a professional KLE course that involved 40 plus hours of training? Raise your hand. Nobody would raise your hand.
Yeah.
How many of you worked with an interpreter? Everybody raises their hand. How many of you were great at working with an interpreter? Keep your hand up. Every hand would stay up. Okay, well, how can all these things be true? How can you guys all be 100% not trained, 100% great at it? And there is no training course that reliably makes you good at working with interpreters, that reliably makes you good at engaging with the local populace. Just because you're a commander doesn't make you good at KLEs. Matter of fact, it probably makes you bad at it because you're using your power in a way that doesn't help the government evolve.
A couple things on that. You know, one thing, the institution and the training. So our medical officer on the provincial reconstruction team, fantastic person, you know, I mean, really, really capable. She told me, you know, when she was going through her training to go over there, they were telling her, you're going to get there and you're going to teach the doctors the most modern methods of ordering of drugs and pharmaceuticals. And that's what she thought. She thought that she was going to show up and teach, you know, hospital administration, right? You know, and she gets there and she says, you know, the best thing I can do is teach women to wash their hands before they handle their newborns. Yeah. You know, I mean, like
with actual soap and water.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like that was and what she was so upset about was that no one had prepared her for that. I mean, she was happy to do whatever, you know, so and your point about the KLEs was her key leader engagements is what that stands for, you know, and, we talked about this on the phone a lot, Pete, about the requirement for human engagement, right? The requirement to actually be a people person. And lots of stories about that. I mean, my first time in Iraq when I was on the State Department team in Iraq, and they had a big thing that a lot of the engineers and stuff that we were having over their work needed to speak Arabic. And I brought this up to you, and they hired these Arabic speakers who were just complete assholes, just complete douchebags. They couldn't work with anybody. Yeah. You know, I mean, like, and great, this person speaks Arabic or this person speaks Dari or Pashto, but they have no ability to build a relationship.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like that kind of you know, again, you're getting now more into the idea of, I used to see this a lot in both places as well in DC, this requirement for quantitative reporting, right? Reporting on a scale. Maybe people are familiar with the traffic light system, red to green, which first of all gets gamed. So every unit that shows up someplace immediately resets it to red, and by the time they leave, they're up to green. You know, 12. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so easily gamed, but it also doesn't provide any nuance, doesn't provide any detail. You know, I mean, like I'm numerically trying to rate the situation of the war here in this province. Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, but so like that insistence on quantitative versus qualitative, this is how a lot of this stuff gets left out, you know, and how you can declare things a success. You know, I mean, I remember dealing with a person in DC about this, someone from one of the pro-war think tanks with the Center for New American Security, talking about how what I want to see as a metric of success is how many district governors spend the night in their district. And I was like, you know what? If I was a commander, I would just put a platoon of dudes around that guy and he would never go anywhere. And I would be a success story. Even if he could never leave the building, he would be a success story because your metric is completely gameable and makes absolutely no sense to anyone who's actually ever done this stuff.
I got to say something about this because here's the other side of that, right? Like we have and this is an act like one of the things, the mantra is fill the task skill, fill the government billets. Yeah. And it's like, stop. Don't you think we've been trying to do that? Why can't we fill it? Let's ask the next question. So, they're desperate to have like the governor won't go to the government center. Well, first off, it sucks fucking balls there. You guys can't reliably get in provisioned. There's barely any electricity. You guys step all over. I mean, look, it's why infantry commanders shouldn't be, as a norm, automatically KLE people. You guys step your foot on his throat all the time and don't allow him to govern. How many times did we ever extract an actual actionable government plan? Like we never did, because we don't care what that guy wants to do. And so, of course, he doesn't want to go there. By the way, and this will surprise everybody, I think, the governor often has to go to the seat of the government to do things, to engage with the ministries, to engage and to pick up a budget. So they spend a lot of time there, and their families live there. Yeah. So there has to be time off station, unless you just want to make the person miserable and non-cooperative. Now, if you can work on that problem, you're working on trying to solve the actual thing. You can't just compel, like they would do this mobile governance patrols, and I wanted to start slapping people, like, stop forcing this guy to go out and talk to people. How do you talk to people now, dude? And he's like, oh, you know what I do? I give the boys notes and I say, hey, send so and so to come see me. And I'm like, that I can measure. Where's he coming from? What's his name? And really track it. And you can start to piece together who was communicating with the government. Because when Pete goes back out, and I'm like, hey, take me out way far away, boss, and the commander does. And I'm like, what do they do at that government center? And they laugh in my face. That's a data point for the commander that you're never going to get anywhere else. So I know I just said a lot of stuff, and we're going to run out of time really fast. So I want to quickly ask you two questions and let you freestyle, and then we'll close the show out when you're done talking.
Sure.
Well, you're running for Senate right now. Apparently, Joe Biden is desperate to make another military mistake, and he's trying to push us into the Ukraine. Pete would say, whether or not it's the right thing to do, nobody in charge right now has earned the right to do this, because all they've shown us, and this is Austin, all of them, all of the people, State Department chief, all these guys have all screwed this up too many times to earn anybody's trust. They might have the authority, but they do not have they have only exhibited the lack of competence to get this done right. So if you were going to be senator, what do you do about this, man? How do we deal with, and am I wrong? I mean, should we be going there regardless?
I know. I completely agree. I said this the other day. I'm sad, disgusted, angry that here we are. The same people, who got my friends killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, got your friends killed. Yeah. And caused unimaginable suffering for millions of Iraqi and Afghan and Libyan and Yemeni and Syrian families. I mean, I use that word unimaginable because we can't really understand it here. We just can't, Sometimes when I talk to a foreign audience, an audience in Germany or an audience in Spain or Japan or something like that, they've got the war. They've got the Spanish Civil War still in their memory. They got my grandparents told me what it was like after, so and so. So but here we don't, and so the same people, just like you said. And I think it's the simple answer. And again, keep bringing up Stu Scheller, and what he's trying to do is accountability. And accountability means, never being in a position again to make that mistake. This is not a question of second chances. This is you should only get one chance to do this correct. When you're at that level, that's it. Because then you failed. Because, it's a question of okay, how much due diligence did you do going into this? Who did you listen to? Yeah. Did you pull in anyone who is disagreeing with you? I know exactly that they don't. Absolutely not. The number of they just don't. They don't listen to anyone who's outside their bubble, and that's both parties, And it's it's that level of accountability where you don't get to make the same error. You don't get to do the same thing. Now, question is whether or not these are actual mistakes, or if they see that there's any other way to do this. You're talking. I'm a big. I explain a lot of this through the lens of empire. The empire always has to constantly expand. You go back very similar to what in Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath when he talks about the banks. Banks are living organisms. They have to expand or they die. Empire is the same way too. You can't just have, we've got 800 bases around the world. Next year, we need 810. I mean, that's just the way the empire is. And, our empire looks different than the Roman Empire, or the British Empire, but it's an empire nonetheless. And so, the accountability as well then too. And if you do something that is criminal, if you do something that, look, I mean, we hung Nazis after World War II, not because they violated the law. They didn't violate German law. They were following German law. The international law really wasn't established to the level of where we hung them, I mean, in the sense of what we were trying to do at Nuremberg. What they violated was the natural law, which Nuremberg, that is what comes out of Nuremberg is that, and what comes out with the United Nations is this preeminence of natural law, right? That trumps man-made law. This innate sense of what is right and what is wrong. If we hung Nazis, then I'm not saying that we should hang George Bush and Dick Cheney and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and et cetera, but we need to treat what they did as crimes, and there must be punishment for it because there's no justice, there's no accountability. I mean, this has been said for a long time now. I can't remember the name of the officer who first said it, but a Lance Corporal or in the Marine Corps, a specialist in the Army gets in a heck of a lot more trouble for losing his rifle or his night vision goggles or for a piece of kit than does a general for not just losing a battle, but for losing an entire war. I mean, I saw this with in Iraq my first time, where I was around General Casey, who was the commander of U.S. and Allied forces in Iraq, 04, 05. And I saw him get promoted to be Army Chief of Staff.
Yeah.
And everyone, all the others. I mean, so that I think is my explanation for what needs to occur. In terms of my campaign, this doesn't just cover the military stuff, but covers politics. How can we have the whole political spectrum? How can we have 850,000 people dead from COVID, right? How can we have a climate crisis that we are doing fuck all about? Right. I mean, in all kinds of other things. I mean, the economy, all kinds of things. And I think this is where I find a lot of excitement with my campaign is that, I think I could sit with someone like Stu Scheller and have a really great conversation with him. I have this conversation with I'm a Green Party, so I'm a leftist, right? So, but I have conversations with folks on the right, libertarians all the time. Some of my best friends are libertarians. I've had libertarians give money to my campaign because I think what we understand is it goes back to what Jefferson says in his first inaugural address, that differences of opinion do not mean differences of principle. Right. And the fact that, look, we have done nothing to do anything about any of these issues. That's student debt issue. You may not be in favor of student debt cancellation, but how can you say this is not something that is dragging our nation down? And maybe you have a different answer to the problem, a different solution, but to ignore it, as both the Democrats and Republicans are doing now, where 1 in 4 Americans are burdened by student debt, to the point that they can't purchase a home, they can't change jobs, they can't afford a new car, things like that, can't pay for their kids' college. I mean, so that's what I think accountability gets at. And we see that with the American public. 62% of the American public wants a third party. 5 years ago, there was a poll, 82% of Americans want fundamental structural change in our election system. I mean, so I don't think anything I'm saying here is radical, except to those who are in power, who are threatened by these ideas.
Yeah, it's crazy. We have the ability to make these changes. We truly have. You want to argue republic, democracy, guess what? Same goddamn word. The power is with the people. Yeah. So we don't need to have someone tell us we have term limits. Unelect people. Quit voting for the same damn people. Quit voting for people who don't even live in your district, for fuck's sake, Come on.
We have that here in North Carolina, folks who don't know I'm in North Carolina. You don't have to live in your district. Well, you don't.
I can't take people seriously when they tell me that these things are for my own benefit. And for fuck's sake, if you're worth $50 million, good job. You're retired from the Congress. Go away. Pick somebody else. You cannot represent me. You can't represent me. I don't have 50 million. I'm never going to have 50 million. I'm not jealous. I'm just saying you won. Go enjoy it. Go start an NGO and dump your money into that. But don't tell me you're going to legislate. And by the way, we're in this pickle with the loans, because legislators either suck at their job or refuse to do it. I mean, when have we last declared war? See, I'm going to make this an hour and a half long show, and I can't do that. All right. Please get elected. Please get elected. I want to see you out there doing the right things, because I can't stand to see us. I'm all for lethality, but you better damn well be prepared to get it right. Or don't get involved in that stuff. Why quit wasting our money losing, And then the institutions that you were complaining about, these guys are at the top of it. They are the institution, so they can take this level of rigor. Anything in closing, Matt?
I can't remember the guy who said it, but your point about lethality there, I can't. He's a blogger, does a lot of stuff on YouTube. I can't remember his name right now, but he's got a quote where he says, just because I'm not paraphrase him, just because I'm not a proponent of violence doesn't mean I've forgotten what violence is, or something along the lines of that. I'm a human being. And we live in the real world. And just because I'm opposed to us going to war in Ukraine to support a corrupt neo-Nazi government doesn't mean I'm automatically in favor of Vladimir Putin. Just the same way, just because I'm running. We've gotten so binary in our political lives, the inability to have nuance, the inability to have layers, the inability to have complexity, a complete devolution into identity politics, us versus them. Without, people vote all the time now on, some type of calculation as if they are a Fox News or MSNBC pundit, rather than voting their conscience, rather than voting their values, rather than voting their beliefs, rather than this is where I stand politically and economically, and I'm going to vote for this person because, that's a lot of the campaign. I appreciate, Pete, you giving me the opportunity to bring this up. And I appreciate you having me on the show. This was, it's not, it was fun to talk about it, but it's not fun stuff. And it's very horrible. Serious, right? And we both know lots of people whose lives have been changed forever. The number of you, right? Yeah,
both of us, suicidal ideation. I don't know when mine's going to stop, but it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, if you ever want to talk about it, please reach out. I'm happy to talk about it. I dealt with, and the same thing too. Anyone watching this, anyone who knows me or is aware of me, you can go to my blog and you can see, I've been speaking about this for a long time. My own suicidal ideation. I deal with traumatic brain injury. I deal with PTSD, but the main thing for me in terms of suicide was the moral injury. And I am more than happy to talk to anyone. I will say there are a lot of different things you can do, but professional help is what is key. One of the issues, though, is when you're dealing with moral injury outside, and even within DOD and VA, they're really starting to only address it now because it's a political thing. We can't have a policy where we admit that our soldiers coming home are killing themselves because they feel guilty what they did, because that's unpatriotic. That goes against American exceptionalism, right? You have that. But also too, it's so if it's that bad in the VA and DOD, I think it's probably even worse in terms of the outside private care who are not familiar with this concept. Yeah. So please, if you yourself are dealing with something, if you have a friend, family member, coworker, classmate, please, I'm always happy to speak to anyone about it, but professional help is the key.
I agree. I did talk to my therapist today, and I talk about suicide ideation because mine's manageable today, and I work at it, but it's doable. All right, let me sign off. Stand by.
Yeah.